Three accounts from inside Brazilian hospitals collected from testimonies of health professionals working in the state of Paraná, Brazil. The elevator in Curitiba. The hospital in Curitiba is the kind of building that accumulates time the way walls accumulate moisture, slowly, silently, and in ways you only notice when the damage is already done. It has stood for decades. The main structure is gray and heavy-boned, with corridors wide enough to suggest that someone, at some point in its history, expected large numbers of people to be moving through them in a hurry. That expectation has never really gone away. She had worked there for over 20 years as a physiotherapist. She knew the layout of every floor the way you come to know a house you've lived in long enough, not consciously, but through muscle memory, through the bottoms of your feet. She knew which sections of hallway picked up a draft at night. She knew which rooms caught the smell of antiseptic more heavily than others, something about the ventilation, the particular stillness of certain corners. She knew the elevator. There were several elevators in the building. The one she is talking about is not the modern set near the main entrance. This is an older bank, toward the rear of the structure, the ones that staff use to move between floors without crossing the public areas. The metal inside the cab was worn dull. The buttons lit up with a faint orange glow, the kind that suggested they had been installed in a different era and had never been replaced. The doors were slow. They did not close with urgency. They slid shut the way things do when they have been doing something for a very long time and see no reason to rush. The elevator went to the basement. That was the floor nobody pressed without a reason. She does not remember exactly when she first heard about it from the other staff members, but it had become part of the institutional knowledge of the place, the kind of information that gets passed along not as gossip but as orientation. A practical warning, offered the way you'd tell a new hire which bathroom to avoid or which attending physician preferred silence during rounds. The elevator, they told her, had a behavior. It was consistent enough that it had stopped surprising anyone who'd worked there long enough. When someone died on one of the upper floors, the elevator would go to that floor first, not always immediately. Sometimes it would happen within minutes, sometimes within the hour. But the sequence was reliable. The cab would stop at a floor, the doors would open and close on no one, and then it would descend to the basement, to the level where the hospital kept its bodies, before returning to normal operation. Staff had learned over the years to watch for this. When the elevator behaved that way, someone would go check the floor it had visited. A patient would be gone. Every time. She was inside it when it happened to her. She had pressed the button for the 4th floor. The doors closed. There was the low mechanical groan of the cable system pulling the cab upward. And then the elevator slowed and stopped, and the doors opened. But not on the 4th floor. She did not recognize the hallway immediately. The light was different. The smell was different. She understood a moment before she saw the signage. The basement. She had not pressed that button. She knew she had not pressed it because the button was on the opposite side of the panel from the 4th floor, and because she had done this enough times to be certain. There was no one else in the cab. There was no mechanical explanation she could identify. The doors stayed open for several seconds, longer than usual, she thought, though time had become difficult to measure. And then they slid shut, and the elevator went to the 4th floor. She went directly to the nurse's station. A patient had died in a room at the end of the hall. The time of death, they told her, was consistent with when she had been in the elevator. What she describes as the worst part is not the fear she felt in the moment. It is something quieter than that. It is the recognition that the elevator had already known, that whatever carried the weight of what had happened in that room had moved through the building in some way she cannot account for, and had arrived at the basement before anyone with a clipboard and a procedure to follow. She has never stopped using that elevator. There is no other reasonable option, but she says she always watches the buttons now, and she always notices when it stops somewhere she did not ask it to go. Vof. The messenger in Capanema. Capanema is a small city in the interior of Paraná, a state in southern Brazil. The population sits around 20,000. There is one hospital. It serves the city and the surrounding municipalities, which means it handles things that, in a larger place, would be distributed among several facilities. The births and the accidents and the surgeries and the long recoveries and the deaths. It is a building that holds a great deal of what happens to people in that part of the world. The woman in question was admitted for a procedure that was, by any clinical measure, routine. Not high risk, not urgent. She was not in danger. She knew this, rationally. And still, the night before the surgery, she could not sleep. Anyone who has spent a night alone in a hospital room before an operation will recognize this particular quality of wakefulness. The way the ceiling becomes too familiar, the way the sounds of the ward settle into your chest, the way the darkness feels different than the darkness at home. It is not irrational. Hospitals are places where bodies are opened. Even when everything is expected to go well, some part of you understands what is at stake. She was lying awake sometime after midnight when the door to her room opened. The man who came in was wearing the uniform of hospital security, what the staff called a gardenia, a diminutive term, something between a security guard and a porter, the kind of role that exists at the margins of a hospital's operations. He appeared calm. He was not alarmed. He spoke to her the way someone might speak to a person they had been sent to check on, with purpose, but without urgency. He told her that he had a message for her. A woman had asked him to pass it along. He gave a name. He described the message as reassurance. The woman, the one who had sent him, wanted her to know that the surgery would go well, that she would be fine, that she should not be afraid. She recognized the name he gave. It was her mother's name. She thought at first that her mother had somehow arranged this, had called the hospital, had spoken to someone, had found some unusual way to have a message delivered in the middle of the night. It was the kind of thing her mother would do. The logic of it did not fully hold, but she was tired and frightened, and she accepted the warmth of it before she examined it. Then she remembered. Her mother had died 2 weeks before. The guardinia was gone by the time she processed this. The door was closed. She rang for the nurse and described what had happened. The man, the uniform, the message, the name. The nursing staff checked. No one matching his description was working that floor that night. No one had logged an interaction with her room. There was no record of anyone being sent to deliver a message to her. The name he had given, the name of the woman who had sent him, did not appear in any visitor log, any call record, any piece of documentation the hospital had. She told the staff the name anyway. One of the nurses went quiet. The surgery went forward the next morning. There were no complications. She recovered completely. She has never been able to account for what she saw that night, or who it was that walked through her door, or how anyone, or anything, knew her mother's name. Knew for the figure in the operating room. This account comes from a biochemist who has worked at the same hospital in Capanema for many years. He is not a person given to dramatic descriptions. He does not use the word ghost. What he describes as something he saw in a room full of other people who also saw it at 3 a.m. during an emergency surgery. The patient came in with severe hemorrhaging. The cause was traumatic, a wound that had been inflicted with force, the specific nature of which the biochemist does not specify in detail. What he says is that the person arrived in a state that the surgical team understood immediately to be serious. Serious in the way that compresses time, where the next several minutes feel like the only thing that exists. The team moved into the operating room fast. He was called in to run labs, which required his presence near the room during the procedure. The operating room at 3 a.m. has a particular atmosphere. The overhead lights are very bright, which makes the edges of the room, beyond the table, feel comparatively dark. The sounds are specific. The rhythm of monitors, the exchange between surgeons, the precise language of people doing something difficult as efficiently as they can. He had been in this room during emergencies before. He knew what it was supposed to feel like. He was in the room when it began. He does not have a more precise description of where the figure came from than this. It separated from the body of the patient. He is careful about the word separated. He means that there was a moment when something that had been within the patient was no longer within the patient. It was translucent. He uses that word specifically, translucent, not transparent, not glowing, not dramatic in any cinematic way. It was simply there in a way that things in an operating room are not supposed to be there. A shape, the approximate shape of a person. It moved to the wall. It stood at the wall. He does not say it watched the proceedings. He says it was oriented toward the table, toward the body it had come from. Whatever it was, it did not leave. It did not dissipate. It did not do anything except remain there, at the edge of the room, in the peripheral space where the bright light from the surgical lamps tapered off into the relative shadow of the walls, and it stayed. He is not sure how long this lasted. He says it felt like a long time. The nurses saw it. He is clear about this. They were not silent about it. There was noise. Not screaming, he says, correcting himself when he uses the word. More like the involuntary sounds people make when the brain has perceived something and has not yet decided how to classify it. One nurse moved toward the door. Another pressed herself against the counter. The surgeons, he is specific about this also, did not stop. Whatever they saw, whatever registered in their peripheral vision, the surgeons continued. Hands continued moving. The procedure continued. Because the alternative was allowing the patient to die while everyone stood still, the patient died anyway. He does not know the exact moment when the figure left. He says that at some point he became aware that it was no longer there, that the wall was just a wall again, that the room had returned to whatever a room is when it contains only the things you expect it to contain. The patient's death was recorded. The time was noted. Reports were filed. None of those reports mention what the staff in that room saw in the hour before the end. He has not discussed it extensively with the other people who were present. He says they do not need to. They were all in the same room. They all saw the same wall. There is nothing to compare notes on. They were there, and what they saw was there with them. And then it was over, and they all went on working in the same hospital where that room exists. Because that is what you do. He says the hardest part is not what he saw. The hardest part is the stillness of it. The way the figure did not seem distressed. The way it appeared to simply watch, with something that, if he is being honest, and he says he is trying to be, he can only describe as patience, as if it had nowhere else to be, as if it understood that what was happening on that table was happening, and had decided to observe it without hurry, without fear, and without any apparent intention to leave before it was ready.